come to this session. Just as I kind of mentioned earlier, I'm not very good at checking the chats while I'm sharing screen. So please just kind of feel free to speak up at any point throughout the presentation if you have questions. There will be an opportunity at the end for questions too. But this is much more of a conversation. So I want you to be able to get all your questions answered if you have them. So please feel free to speak up. Again, this is budget training. Definitely the very basics of it. That can get into some pretty good detail, but today we won't get into that detail. If you have questions, you can always contact me down the road as well. My contact information is on the bottom of the screen. I'm Adria Long, the Executive Director of SUSSI, which is Shippensburg University Student Services. So today I'm going to cover a couple different topics. First, I'm going to kind of go over some resources that are available for you, specifically relating to budgets and where to find them. We're going to cover the different types of budgets, special allocations that are available to student groups, as well as student group fundraising, and then the administration and disbursement of the funds. So two of the main resources that are available to you that you're going to want to use when it relates to budgets are the budget and finance standing rules, as well as the student group funding flow chart. The budget and finance standing rules really outlines all the different types of groups there are, because within the SGA recognize they're broken down into what we consider a club, what we consider an organization, club sports, student media. So there's different breakdowns within the SGA recognized category, and depending on what your category is, will depend on some of the funding that you're available for. So the budget and finance rules are definitely a good tool to use if you have questions about what you're eligible for as far as funding, and what you can and cannot spend your money on. The student group funding flow chart, it just tells you if your student group is eligible to receive funding from SGA. And these resources can be found at on-campus groups. So I provided the link there, and I'm going to share the screen because there's a lot of other resources there as well. Can you all see this Student Government Association webpage?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So on this page, there are links to a lot of other resources as well. The standing rules are right here, and they are the most up to date. The student group funding flow chart is right here. All of the other expenditure request forms, special allocation forms, they're all listed here as well. And there's also some student group management resources as well, like the student group handbook. So this page is really a great resource for student groups. If you have questions, I suggest this is the first place you may want to look when it comes to answering some of your questions. And then, like I said, you can always reach out to myself, or any of the student government officers would also be able to help you with a lot of your questions. Okay, so we're back to the PowerPoint, hopefully.
Yep.
Thanks, Ashley. So the most common budget that student groups receive from the SGA or from SUSSI are the operating budgets. These budgets are funded from the student activity fee. So those of you that are sort of unfamiliar with the process, Shippensburg University Student Services is a separate entity from the university. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. The university remits to us any of the student activity fees that they collect, and then we use those student activity fees and allocate them to student groups and student group activities. So student groups that are eligible to receive an operating budget are typically undergraduate student groups. They must be SGA recognized by November 1 before the start of the budget process. So typically budget trainings normally start happening around November, and then budgets are to be submitted to SGA in February, typically of the spring semester. So as long as they are SGA recognized by November 1, they are eligible to receive a budget for the next fiscal year, which this is somewhat of a new rule. The last time they updated the budget and finance standing rules, this was changed. Prior to this, it had been 1 calendar year, which we just felt that that was too long of a period for a group to go without funding. They must attend the budget training, and then they must properly complete and submit budget requests form through ShipLink. In this presentation, I'm not going to be showing you how to use the budget forms in ShipLink. I will be going over that in the ShipLink training that is later this week. So if you have questions about that, please tune into that training and I will be going over that. This operating budgets are an annual allocation and they do not roll forward from one year to the next. Does anybody have questions on operating budgets? The next type of budget that you can get from the SGA is a capital budget. So capital budgets are requested for items, typically supplies and equipment, usually that are greater than $1,000 in cost, and the expected life of them is greater than 1 year. This is not, you don't have the same student groups requesting capital budgets every year. This should be somewhat non-recurring, and the eligibility is the same as for operating budgets. And this one, again, the requests would be submitted once a year through ShipLink. Now we have a couple different kinds of special allocations that student groups can request throughout the year. So I'm going to go through these different types of allocations and when you can request them and how you go about requesting them. The first one is an additional allocation. Additional allocations are requested for special non-recurring requests for events or activities. So let's say, you know, this year, now that we are completely back in person, you know, maybe last year when you budgeted, you didn't think you were going to be doing as many face-to-face events and you wanted to add another program to, you know, your calendar for the year, but you didn't budget for that. So you can come to the budget and finance and request an additional allocation for that event. And these requests are accepted on an ongoing basis throughout the year. The form that you see attached here would be the form that you would have to complete and submit to the Budget and Finance Committee or the SGA VP of Finance, who is Chase Slinker this year. These forms can be found on the ShipLink page that I had you at previously. And they are all fillable forms, so you can, you know, complete them on your computer, and we do accept electronic signatures as well. Another type of special allocation is the conference allocation. So when student groups want to go on to conferences, they can request additional funds. They don't typically budget for conferences in their operating budgets each year. So these requests are accepted on an ongoing basis throughout the year. They have to be submitted to the Budget and Finance Committee at least 3 weeks prior to the start date of the conference. And that's just to give us a little bit of leeway in case we have questions or need to have that student group come and present really why they feel the conference is a necessary conference for them to go to at the Budget and Finance Committee meeting. Budget and Finance Committee does meet weekly, so usually the request can get turned around fairly quickly. But just in case there are questions, we ask that we have it 3 weeks prior. In addition to the conference allocation, they are required to sign a contract of conduct. This is just to make sure that they know that when they are at this conference, they are representatives of Shippensburg University and they are to act the way, or they want to be a good representation of who we are. And then when they return, they must submit a minimum of a 1-page written report within 2 weeks of the return from the conference to the SGA Vice President of Finance on what the organization learned at the conference and is bringing back to the university. So it's really important because we're getting student activity fee money. Each student is paying for it. So we try to fund things that are going to benefit the most amount of people or the most amount of students on our campus. You know, if it's a conference that is really specialized and is really only going to benefit 1 or 2 people, the chances of getting the full funding is probably fairly slim. So that's why we kind of require this written report. We like to know what these students learned and are bringing back. Now, this is actually a new request or a new special allocation this year. The SGA really thinks that it's important for student groups to collaborate and work together on different events. So they've created a collaboration fund. What this fund does is it's a pot of money that's it's set aside for student groups who want to collaborate on a program. They can request this money on an ongoing basis throughout the year and at least 3 weeks prior to the start date of the event. Now, there are some stipulations that we have in place. So, you know, one student group cannot continually come back and say they're collaborating with another. I believe there's a number limit as to how many times one student group can request collaboration funds. But, you know, it's a way to really get students working together on our campus. And it also helps student groups who might be smaller and not have as much funding in their operating budget to work with another student group and put on a bigger program than what they would typically be capable of. It gets their name out there as well as the other student group as well. So this is a new one this year, and we're excited to see how this one goes. Any questions on that?
Adria, I have a question. Is there a maximum amount of money that can be requested through this fund?
Yeah, so the pot of money only for this budget, I think we set aside about $20,000. And it is stipulated that a piece of those student groups' operating budgets also have to cover some of the expense of the program.
Okay.
But as far as each individual request, we don't necessarily have a limit on what that amount is.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So that really covers our special allocations that can be requested on an ongoing basis throughout the year, and they're outside of the operating budgets. Next, I want to talk about fundraising and what we call agency fund accounts. This is, I think, a topic that not too many people know a lot about. So it's important to make sure we understand what the process is for fundraising, and what do we do with the money that we fundraise, because we really don't want the students holding on to it. We don't want them depositing it in off-campus bank accounts. So, you know, making sure we know the processes here is highly important. The first step to any fundraiser is completing the fundraising application. This fundraising application can be found on the SGA ShipLink webpage that I had pulled up earlier. It gives detail as to what the fundraiser is. Any fundraiser that is on or off campus should technically be completing the fundraising application each time you do a fundraiser. Then the applications are then evaluated and approved or denied based on the information provided. This year, I've also added a mechanism for student groups who want to do fundraisers and provide a cashless payment option. I know that there are student groups out there that use Venmo, and more than likely it's going into a personal Venmo account and then the check is getting cut somewhere. Or I don't know all the details. I don't necessarily want to know all the details. But this year we've created a PayPal account. So what I can do is if your student group is planning on doing a fundraiser and they want to have a cashless payment option, they can reach out to me. I will create an event for them in PayPal and give them a link. That link can have a logo attached to it. I can specify dollar amounts that they want, or it can just be any dollar amount if you're, it depends on what type of fundraiser you're doing. Then I would give you this link. Then you can distribute the link as you see fit. I then track the money that is coming into the PayPal account and make sure that it gets distributed properly. Fundraising funds then should be deposited into what we have here called agency fund accounts. So these are separate accounts from student group operating budgets, where student groups can deposit their fundraising money. At the time the agency fund is set up, we require an agency fund application to be completed. There is an agency fund agreement and then a signature card, because essentially this agency fund account is a bank account for them. And then the money can be spent however they see fit, other than there are some stipulations, they can't spend it on drugs or alcohol or those sorts of things. But it is outside of the operating budget, and this money does roll forward from one year to the next. We strongly encourage student groups to not have off-campus bank accounts. There can be a lot of issues with that, in that, one, they would have either had to provide an EIN number or a social security number in order to open up the bank account. Now, I say strongly discourage, but there are some student groups who can have off-campus bank accounts, and they are typically associated with Greek organizations because they are part of a national chapter, and that national chapter allows them to open up a bank account with their EIN number. So there are some situations where it is okay, but if you're an advisor of a student group, you should not be using your social security number to open up a bank account for a student group. So just be very cautious about that. If you need to open up an agency fund account, the process is fairly easy. And I would give you an account number, and it really just acts as a bank account.
Adria, I have a quick question.
Yes.
If you don't mind. With the agency fund accounts, is that something we can just email you if we would like an update as to where we're at, since it's been kind of so long with COVID and everything?
Yeah, like if you need balance information or any type of history, you can reach out to myself or Dina Bear, who is our administrative assistant here in our office, and we can give you that information. It's best if you have your account number, but if you have the name of the account, that usually works as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So student groups are, I just say that, but then I say student groups are responsible to track. This is a learning tool for student groups, and they should be tracking and keeping record of this account. However, we also have records on our end because, at the end of the day, we have to provide support and stuff for the transactions that happen in it. But it is important still to empower these student groups to kind of keep track of their money and know what they have and what they can spend it on. So. The administration and disbursement of this kind of goes back to more operating budgets than agency fund accounts. There is somewhat of a different process for agency fund accounts, but not significantly different. But for operating budgets, they have to complete this expenditure request form. These forms have changed just a little bit over the last, I don't know, I guess year and a half or so. You have to provide the date, the name of the organization number, and who we are making the check payable to. We also ask that you select whether the check is going to be mailed, picked up. We also have an ACH payment option now as well. The only thing with ACH is the vendor does have to complete ACH form and have it on file here in our office. For the smaller student groups, I don't necessarily suggest doing ACHs because it could be kind of hard to track who we have set up for ACH payments and who we don't. But for some of the student groups who have, monthly recurring payments to the same vendor, that might be something that you want to look into. We also require the account description, which is simply, okay, is this supplies and equipment? Is it a programming cost? So that's what the account description is, and then the account number, the invoice date, and the invoice number, and then a description of the expense. And we just ask that you be as descriptive as possible as to what the expense is for. This helps us track and gives us more historical information. If you're not really providing descriptive information, it's hard to know what the expense is for. And when we go to pull historical information, we might not be able to accurately tell or classify the expense. So I just ask that you be as descriptive as possible. These forms are to be submitted to the fiscal office by 1 p.m. on Tuesday, and we cut checks every Thursday. If for some reason we're on holiday or we're not cutting checks on Thursday, there will be an email that goes out to let everybody know that. Something to also keep in mind, if a vendor that you are working with does not have their own contract, most vendors do, but maybe you're working with a student or a previous student who is just starting a business and trying to get off the ground. They don't have a contract yet. We have student group service agreements that we ask that you complete. And this is just another way for us to make sure that we have a contract in place for any services that are provided. And there are different service agreements for different things. So if the expense is greater than $100, the contract goes into a little bit more detail and talks a lot more about liability and those sorts of things. We have separate contracts for DJs and some for prizes as well. Something other people don't necessarily know is that we do have a credit card here on file in our office. Student groups can come into our office. They have to sit down at a computer here and complete the purchase while they're in our office, but they can use our credit card for online purchases. Something to be aware of is when they do online purchases, it's highly likely that they're going to be charged sales tax. We are sales tax exempt, so they have to go through the proper protocols in order to submit sales tax exempt forms to the vendor and make sure that we don't get charged the sales tax. Another option for student groups is petty cash. We do have some cash available here in our office. So if a student group needs to run to Walmart and just grab a couple things for their program over the weekend, they can come to our office, request cash, and then they would return any remaining cash and the receipts to cover the cash. So those are some options that people don't always know we have for them. Some recent changes. Since I started in July of 2019. And since I started, we put in a new accounting system with a little bit more capability as far as reporting goes for student groups. So with that new system, we created a new chart of accounts. We tried to keep them somewhat similar to previous chart of accounts. So, in the old chart of accounts, just the number 101 was supplies and equipment. Well, now it's 1-6101. So we tried to keep them somewhat comparable to the old system, but the old system also had a lot longer of a number. It was, I think, like 1- and then the student group number -101 and then some other, it was a long number. So now for the account number, all you have to provide is the 1-6101 when completing the expenditure request forms. When you're in ShipLink submitting a budget, the new accounts are listed and you can select from those accounts. And I've attached kind of a picture or a snippet of what a report would look like if you request to see what your budget remaining is for the year. So, the first column is what the account number is and the description. And then the next one is currently during that year, what have you spent? Then the middle column is what you actually budgeted for. And then the last column is whether you're over or under in your budget and how much money you have remaining. Something else we have sort of changed is you can have expenses in a line item that you didn't necessarily budget for. Now, I caution you to say that there are restrictions on what student groups can spend their money on. So you still have to stay within the rules on what you can spend your money on, but we don't restrict you to only what you budgeted for. We do restrict you to the total amount that was budgeted, but you can somewhat move that money freely around as you see fit, because what we really want to do is we want an accurate picture of where you spent your money. If you're restricted only to those line items, in the past, student groups would have to or were supposed to request line item transfers, but that didn't always happen. So what we were finding is people would put expenses and supplies and equipment that really weren't supplies and equipment just to use up that budget. Well, on the accounting side of things, that really causes a lot of classification issues on our end. So we want an accurate picture of where student groups are actually spending their money. And then that helps you budget better going forward. So, at the end of the year, a student group could request to see what their budget to actual was, or not at the end of the year, or when they are budgeting, they can request to see a report just like this. And that would help them then budget for the next year. All right, we kind of went through that fast. Does anybody have any questions that they would like answered? Like I said, I have an open door policy. Anybody can call me, stop by my office anytime. As you're working with your student groups, if issues come up or you have questions, I'm more than willing to sit down with any of the advisors or even the students and help you work through any issues.
Adria, I think you may have mentioned this, but I do have one question.
Yes.
When it comes to budgets on ShipLink, can
Yes.
all of that now be done through ShipLink?
So the submitting of the budget can be, yes.
Okay.
Currently, where we're standing is budgets are being submitted through ShipLink, but that is the extent of it. So throughout the year, you can refer to ShipLink and you can look in there to see what your approved budget was, but you're not going to see a budget to actual. And that's going to be coming in the future, but we kind of wanted a slower rollout of campus groups. We wanted to make sure the submitting of the budgets was working properly. But my goal is at some point in the future to be able to have expenditure requests submitted through ShipLink.
Okay.
And then you would be able to track your remaining balance in ShipLink, but we're not there yet.
Okay, so just the initial, when you
What's
submit your
approved?
annual
Yes.
budget and approved.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
So
Thank you.
anytime you want to see what's remaining or where you currently stand, you have to reach out to myself or Dina. Good question. Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you all. I